Perfect pitch can damage your musical life, if you let it. So the focus of today's video here will describe what it's like to live with perfect pitch and make music, taking steps to ensure that the additional data that comes with perfect pitch does not cause counterproductive interference with your music communication capacity. So in my previous video on the topic, I explained how the utility of perfect pitch ultimately amounts at most to a novelty party trick, a quick 2-second shortcut. It's like someone who can do crazy math in their head instantly without a calculator. Perfect pitch people can identify the name of a note just by hearing it, without even looking at the instrument, and they instantly recognize it. Oh yeah, I hear that, that's the note D. Whereas I, Alex Yard, do not have perfect pitch, so I would need to check that on a piano, if I was in a test situation. But that's the thing, that never happens. When am I in a test situation with a blindfold? I'm only ever working on a project or like jamming with people. So since I already know what the key of the song is and I've heard it and everyone would, I could just at that point put a blindfold on and identify literally any note that the professor played. So by then, everyone's achieved parity even if they don't have perfect pitch. At most, perfect pitch could certainly give you a leg up in advanced jazz improv sessions, so you can impress snobs like these better. And if you're frequently changing key and you're needing to react on the fly to what your bandmates are improvising, there could be an advantage with perfect pitch there. The culture of these jazz creations is aggressive and unwelcoming, with insecure competitions and resentments bordering on hateful in its mechanics of disdain for people in the lower castes. But outside of that elite battleground, perfect pitch buys you almost nothing of benefit, and what comes with it has an overload of specific information that can even begin to interfere with communication if the arbitrary qualia are cross-contaminated with actual reality. Perfect pitch is a sensitive subject and a cause of heated music theory debates, so today's video will look at some of the common backlash and put it in context, turning it into a positive by suggesting how people with perfect pitch can use their ability in a way that doesn't backfire like a crutch you lean too heavily on. So before we jump into part 1 of this video, we're going to begin with a case study analogy that will actually make the tricky parts of perfect pitch way more intuitive. So here we go. Have you ever heard of language synesthesia? It's a cross-sensory thing where more than one sense is activated at once. For example, you see the letter G and you feel a certain color with it, or like the letter A is green, B is yellow, and so on. Or maybe numbers feel like they have colors. Now, the important example today is associating colors with specific months. Now, Deckard made this video called "What Color is Each Month and Why?" You can see Deckard's personal color associations for each month look like this, and other people's color associations are not necessarily going to match with his. So Deckard wanted to research whether there were any common trends, and the results of his survey were pretty fascinating. So let's look at the findings he discovered for the month of January. Wow, look at that, leaning heavily towards blues, and especially light blues. Now, it can be tempting to start thinking, maybe blue is the one true color of January. Since so many people skew so heavily towards those shades of blue, they must be onto something, right? Maybe the other people's compass is off if some outliers have January as red or green or whatever. All right, so if your critical thinking hat is tingling right now, there's a reason. And we've now arrived at the shocking twist, okay? So here's next month, February's survey results. Notice anything? Oh, okay, shades of pink are heavily favored. All right, so the jig is up. February is pink for so many people because Valentine's Day. Okay, so then January was blue because of ice in the winter. Well, so think about it. Brazil and Colombia celebrate their Valentine's Day in June and September, and their climate is set up differently, entirely. There's no frozen ponds in Brazil in January. So this right now will be the most important concept of this whole video as applied to music and audio. The massive eureka moment here is that these are learned environmental associations, not inherent properties. That bears repeating. These are learned environmental associations, not inherent properties. So like if someone, for example, is writing a song with lyrics and she wants to invoke the color blue for thematic reasons, so she uses the word January in her lyrics. Well, that's only going to work for members of the audience that live in a country where it's icy in January. Okay, so with that happening with colors, we are now going to go ahead and apply this premise directly to perfect pitch because a lot of the same things are happening. So in a previous video, I explained how perfect pitch people have learned perceptions of individual notes in a similar way to those months with colors. And I know I was provocative in the thumbnail for clicks, but always exercise media literacy. You're welcomed in here to defend your cause. Transparent discussions are a win for everyone. My commentary fundamentally rejects the idea that C is calm, F sharp is gloomy, and G is warm, etc., especially since people with perfect pitch disagree on those note personalities. Does that sound familiar? Suddenly, we're not talking about music theory proper, but also more so the sociological behind the scenes that got the music writer into a setting where composition now occurs. That is separate from the music itself, the sound. So let's look at the impassioned response of dissent by Aria from the comments section of that very perfect pitch video that I did. It reads as follows. This video is honestly a paragon of ignorance and at times fallacious misconstrual that comes across as a desperate attempt to make oneself feel better about lacking perfect pitch. Alright, so first of all, here's the reason why it is in fact definitely worthwhile to discuss this. Once you reach adulthood, you either have perfect pitch or you don't. So you either have to have it naturally or the skill can be cultivated in early childhood intentionally. Now, I don't have perfect pitch, so you might think it's a lost cause for me to even talk about this, but then you think about the next generation of musicians. Parents can intentionally cultivate perfect pitch if they choose, as Rick Beato did. So this discussion will touch upon the different facets of be careful what you wish for, that increased biological abilities are not automatically all good or a net positive, because it indeed comes with a downside. Is more data always better? Imagine if you had perfect color pitch. Every time you see colors, you also automatically perceive the specific hex value of each color tone. That data presents itself unasked and occupies space in your consciousness. Will that data enhance day-to-day operations or interfere with it? Literally, what is the utility? What does that earn you that other people don't have? Can a person get along just fine with the qualia of the colors, the sensory experience, without the clutter of the extra hard data of the specific color shade info? That's what I'm getting at with perfect pitch. If you paint a painting that factors in all that super specific hex color data, the audience won't notice that. It's just like the saying, the tongue who talks to a deaf ear is mute. This occurs when the recipient is unable to receive the message you've sent. Music is a communication method. It's easy for people to lose track of this. But perfect pitch has no communication utility. It's a closed, self-contained loop within the composer's brain. So if you emphasize these hidden layers of music making in your process, that's like writing a novel with inside jokes to your childhood that no one will be able to make sense of. So each time you're contemplating a composing choice with an underlying motivation, you just have to ask yourself, who will actually perceive this? What percentage of the audience? Because these things that Aria and others spend creative cognitive efforts to calculate may be perceived by no one beyond herself, right? But no matter who you ask, a perfect fifth is sturdy, and an augmented fourth is wobbly. That's what I'm saying. This is all about ratios between values, not individual values. Modes, not keys. Aria goes on to say this. Once more, perfect pitch is not mainly a party trick. If you have come to rely on that piece of information for your music making, and suddenly lose it, which again is not even the main way perfect pitch is lost, you immediately feel a void. It's like losing an arm or a leg. You relied on it heavily, and now it's gone. Okay, so the pitfall cautionary tale here is that relying on perfect pitch the way Aria has is like relying on training wheels. It means you can always ride the bike upright without tilting over, but you never actually have to learn how to balance a bike with your own adaptive reactions. That skill will atrophy in the meantime. So the advice for perfect pitch possessors to ensure the ability doesn't become a training wheel crutch is disregard that automatic pitch info in your brain. It will always be there, but disregard it to instead focus on the universal properties. But some perfect pitchers will say that disregarding this perfect pitch info is not even possible. So let's take a look. With the quote here, but we cannot simply ignore it and learn music some other way. The knowledge of what absolute frequency a tone is embedded in our qualia. It is often the most apparent feature of that qualia and is inseparable from the rest of it. All right, now in this case, Aria is not trying hard enough, and it shows. When I play the piano, I can look at the keys and I can clearly see that I'm pressing C, then E. That info is right there visually on the piano, but I'm not thinking of it as E, I'm just thinking of it as the jubilant major third, if the song is in C. That is the universal property, with no arbitrary baggage of Valentine's Day. Now, with language, if I write the word envelope, I'm not thinking of the letter E with any significance or identity. E is just its own building block, not an identity in itself. Like I don't look at the letter E in envelope with nostalgia for other words that contain the letter E. Like, the word envelope brings back good memories, because growing up I really enjoyed the letter E in the word elephant. Nope. Those are two entirely separate things completely. The building blocks have no identity until they are used in combination to construct a larger structure, just like music. So you can avoid this fallacy in music and pitch by avoiding the pitfall in Aria's quote here. To perfect pitch possessors, each pitch is unique and has its own character, even with an equal temperament, and independent of the instrument it's played on. We derive a huge amount of utility from this information. So people, do not fall for this tempting, seductive thought process, because Australians won't pick up on your January blue vibes. See how it all connects together? It's a mistake to buy into the idea that each pitch has its own unique character, independent of the instrument. This is a synesthesia-adjacent myth. Let's say Adam Neely thinks the note A is red, while Kamala Harris thinks the note A is green. And then the majority of the population perceives no color in sound since they don't have synesthesia. They're just like, it's a note, what notes is it being used with? So when these Gen Pop people like me hear the note A, it's about as basic as a letter in the alphabet. You use it with others to spell words, and thus only then do you create identity. It's just a building block, not containing its own traits. So now what happens if Adam is composing a song and says, I want to use the note A here. So when this part of the song kicks in, you get this punch of red passion, aggression, blood, and stop signs, all those associations with the color red. Well, Kamala is not going to receive that message, which Adam is naively attempting to communicate. When Kamala gets to that note, she just feels plants, trees, nature. So Adam and Kamala are perceiving two different codes, and the tongue that speaks to a deaf ear is mute. On top of that, the majority of listeners won't sense any colors, since they're just receiving the note based on the tonal, center, the relative interval. The note A is an uplifting major third if the song is in F. So here Aria doubles down in a final collapsed attempt to flesh out a color metaphor for the perfect pitch situation. Aria says, "After all, the absolute color of something is just a subjective experience with no objective value, because for the sake of this thought experiment, the EM spectrum is no longer objective reality. All you need to know is color theory and how colors complement and relate to each other. If an artist thinks their use of the color green over any other color means anything, it's just masturbatory." Now, I'm going to try to be as nice as possible while responding here, but yikes, this is provocative and double misguided. All right? When a painter or even a novelist invokes the color green, they are indeed evoking all the associations of green that everyone shares. They are universal. Trees are green in America and Australia. You should check that, Aria. Green is the color of nature's trees and grass planet-wide. So any author that uses the color green deliberately can expect a college class full of students to all pick up on the nature that it is invoking. Now, by comparison, this is not the way it works with letters and language, and thus for notes of musical pitch. If Katy Perry writes a song in the key of G, music students or fans that listen along are not hearing it and being like, "Oh, the key of G, that's the key with that feisty character," which Bob Dylan used to great effect in his songs. I mean, Aria even admits that, quote, "absolute pitch information is context dependent on music you've listened to before." All right, but if your listening audience was not raised on the same Bob Dylan jams, then the tongue that speaks to a deaf ear is mute. So this is now going to culminate in the biggest fallacy of perfect pitcheteers, and this may objectively be my single most important contribution to date to music theory education discussions, and I have touched upon what I am about to tell you in a major way in the Metallic Madness music theory video, okay? Some music theory professors understand this, but others don't, and I've witnessed it firsthand. So here's Aria's final stand. You ready? "And again, surely absolute pitch height does convey information, especially when pitch heights fall differently on different instruments and affect the apparent timbre. Flat keys on string instruments genuinely sound timbrally darker, for instance." Okay? So, this perception here that flat keys sound timbrally darker, all right, reality check, timbre is a different thing that does not require perfect pitch perception to detect. Anyone that can perceive timbre can detect it. You don't need perfect pitch. So bringing that into a perfect pitch discussion is irrelevant and off topic. The pivotal thing here, this vocabulary term Aria has brought in called flat keys. You ready for this? The idea of flat keys itself is a total myth. Total myth. When it comes to pitch, the difference between these so-called flat keys and natural keys is absolutely nothing. And you see how I even strain to say those words like flat keys because it's a misleading misnomer. Do you want to know what the difference between a piano's white keys and black keys is? Absolutely nothing. Everything is relative, and C-sharp can do literally everything that C can do. There's nothing inherently more sharp about the note C-sharp compared to C. That is only ever a relative comparison of sharpness. C natural is sharp in that same way compared to B. Those names are only for musician notation clarity, behind the scenes, not for the music experienced by the audience. Just take a look at the specific airwave frequency values for each note pitch. Do you see all these messy decimals? They need to be decimals in order to correspond to the ratios that define intervals, right? Ratios, not values. C to E, like we said, is of course a major third. So the pitch comparison needs to be a ratio of 4 to 5. And it is, just look. But if we conduct this comparison on flat notes instead, how about G flat to B flat, also a major third, and there you have the very specific intentional ratio of 4 to 5. So guys, here's the mind blower. This note G flat is not actually flat in any meaningful way whatsoever. It's just called G flat because compared to G natural, it's flat by comparison for the names that we have artificially assigned to pitches using language. And the reason why people have a lot of trouble with this is because the current state of music theory education has so many different applications of the word flat that it's very easy and unfortunate for people to get seduced by the language vocab overlap and begin insisting on connections that do not actually exist, such as Aria's case study here. The main thing you notice here is that, and this is the curious fact, the only note that has clean integers without messy decimals is A. That's not by accident. That is because the Council of White Music Theoreticians decided, all right, we'll call this frequency A to start, which will begin things out with nice clean integers, and then all the other notes will conform to their relative ratios, even if the decimals get messy. And it worked. So as we've now arrived at the finale of this video here, I'm going to provide my parting advice to perfect pitch possessors on how they might make the best use of their ability throughout their life. And finally, I will put the ball in the court of perfect pitch advocates, especially militant ones like Aria, to put their money where their mouth is, an opportunity to prove what they are claiming, if it is indeed substantive and actually occurring in the real world. It is indeed possible that something was overlooked today in this review of relative pitch ratios. So be my guest. I remain here, as always, with an open mind, here on this terrestrial internet radio station, 91.6 WAYZ, the Alex Yard Zone, deep in the heart of Boston. So, to perfect pitch possessors who can't get rid of it. With music notes assigned names from the alphabet, A, B, C, they only contain meaning through the way they're used in relative context with other notes. Okay, so don't compose music that indulges this fallacy that individual notes convey a particular character. Because lots of people will not feel that that G note you like feels feisty if the audience didn't grow up on the same catalog of Bob Dylan music that you did. Just as the Australians will never find your January to be blue. Focus only on universal traits. So for a basic one, like we said, perfect fifth, very stable. Augmented fourth, very unstable. That's true no matter what key you're operating in. The choppy decimals in the table of frequencies accomplish equal status and ability for any and all notes. Think ratios, not individual values. Individual values are 100% meaningless, as mentioned in the Metallic Madness music theory video. And here's poor Tails receiving the news about how so much of that seemingly seductive data is actually just a meaningless dead end. That makes him rethink everything. All right, so here's where I will respectfully put the ball in the court of Aria and other people who might want to intentionally raise their kid to acquire perfect pitch in early childhood. I politely challenge you to prove what you are specifically saying here. Quote, flat keys on string instruments genuinely sound timbrally darker, for instance. I assert that this timbre info, if it was legit, could actually be perceived by anyone, since, like we said, timbre perception is separate from perfect pitch. So you could give any musician a timbre test in a double-blind setting and ask, which of these notes I'm going to play out loud here sound darker or not as dark? Perfect pitch would not be necessary to detect that. Furthermore, even if flat keys were darker, perfect pitch would still only earn you 2 seconds of convenience. That party trick of doing complicated multiplication without a calculator. It all comes back to that party trick. It's a novel 2-second rote time saver, after which everyone is on equal footing in their music-making thought process. I suspect, meanwhile, that perfect pitchers are so preoccupied with the name G-flat, for example, that they are misguided in assigning a darker identity to that. So this is a good result of the internet, that we can gather together like this and talk through the implications of this information, to debunk and discard seductive myths that were more common in college classrooms prior to the information age. So now, as a post-credits after-dinner mint to chew on for the remainder of this evening, is to stop and think about what it means that society decided to use letters, specifically, as the signifier names for notes. But those are arbitrary signifiers that easily could have been something else. Now, sequencing these letters in the order that they appear in the alphabet, that does earn you the benefit that it's intuitive and sequential to see the letters in order just like the alphabet, but that brings problems with it. Because if you're not careful, what's going to seep into your music thought process are all those arbitrary learned environmental associations. Happy Valentine's Day. Did you guys know that the letter A has a sort of implicit social power? That you'll do better on dating apps if your name starts with an A or other early letters of the alphabet. The data demonstrates this. It's a learned societal association in the alphabet, which itself is an artificial human construct. It's not a property of sound or light, it's just an idea, which is to say, could we hypothetically name the notes with anything other than the letters A through G? Well, yeah. I mean, if we instead named the notes T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, so then you'd have like a U-sharp major 7th chord. Sounds kind of cool, right? What about shapes and other symbols? Definitely. Check out this alternate naming scheme. Orb, spike, box, tray, star, cross, wave. Gimme that wave sus2 chord. You notice how each and every one of those names is a quick one syllable? If you see us running, try to keep up. The point here is that this name lives only behind the scenes. They are artificial signifiers, means to an end. These artificial names are for the benefit of the craft behind the scenes to write and communicate musical ideas clearly. So to boil it down, don't let your Blue January associations delude you into speaking a personal language that will fall on deaf ears in the audience. All right, so now in the final paragraph here, I will now commend Aria for being an exceptionally good writer and communicator. Even though I disagree with a lot of her ideas, she does articulate it exceptionally well, and that's super helpful to understand where she's coming from so as to move the conversation forward. So I can absolutely commend Aria for communicating with confidence and clarity. That counts for a lot. Good night, everybody.